In John chapter 20, verse 21, Christ has been crucified, rose again. Before he ascends, he gathers his followers together and says, "As the Father has sent me, so send I you." Go back to John chapter 1, verse 14. How did the Father send him? In the fullness of grace and truth. Well, then that means I must live out a life, the fullness of grace and truth. How do I know if I'm winning? How do I know if I am succeeding in this? Are there any checkpoints to be able to look at?
Right. Well, one of the things I love about that passage in John 1 and the twice repeated, full of grace and truth, is that it is this two-point checklist of Christ-likeness. And you can go to lots of places and see what Christ was like. You see it actually in the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5. But the fruit of the Spirit has 9 components that are listed. Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, all of those. And I can't quite wrap my mind simultaneously around 9 attributes. But grace and truth is pretty simple. And we're pretty simple people. And it's sort of, I use the analogy in the Grace and Truth book, we have a Dalmatian named Moses, okay? And Moses will pick up one tennis ball, and of course dogs love tennis balls, and maybe you've seen golden retrievers that have about 4 or 5 tennis balls in their mouths, But my Dalmatian can only basically get one ball in, but he tries to get a second one. And just for a moment, he's holding both of those tennis balls in his mouth, but one of them always spurts out. He can't contain both. Well, we're kind of this way with grace and truth. There's these 2 attributes of God. Jesus comes full of grace and truth, and for a moment we've got the truth ball in our mouth, and then we try to get the grace ball in there, and then the truth ball comes out, because it doesn't last very long. Well, we need to be able to hold both the grace and truth of God in our lives. And in terms of measuring, how does that look like? It's interesting because John 1 is followed by John 2, which is actually very logical. And John 2 has Jesus doing his first miracle. You remember what that miracle was? And you think, now, if you were going to come up with a first miracle, what would you come up with? How about raising Lazarus from the dead? Boy, let's get off to a big start here. What does he do? He transforms water into wine so that people will be happy at a wedding feast. What a very kind and gracious thing to do. And then that little act of grace, maybe it was a big act of grace to those people, was followed immediately by him going into the temple and cleansing the temple in holiness and power. Truth. So you have grace and you have truth. So this 2-point checklist, Jesus acts in grace and he acts in truth. A perfect example of that is in John 8, where he says to the woman taken in adultery, "Where are your accusers?" And he says, "I'm not going to condemn you." And then he says, "Go and sin no more." Do you see all the grace in that? And do you see the truth in it? He's not denying her sin. Go and sin no more. Grace and truth. So I think we have to look at our parenting, we have to look at ourselves in our church relationships, and we have to say, look, am I acting in grace and truth? Not grace or truth as if choosing between them, but am I acting in both? Only then am I reflecting Christ.
And reflecting Christ is our aim. 30 times in the Gospel of John, Jesus will say, "I'm doing this so that you can see the Father in me."
Yes.
Well, if his Spirit's in us, then and we are to be sent as he was sent, then the Father should be seen through us so that they would see Christ and see the Father. How do we do that in practical ways? You talk about married life, you talk about children, you talk about relationships at work. In a very pragmatic way, how do we put grace and truth to work?
Well, you're absolutely right in terms of if the world is going to see Jesus, where are they going to look? Well, in the Old Testament, there he was, their God was dwelling in the Holy of Holies. And then Jesus came full of grace and truth and manifesting God. Where do people see God in the world today? Well, they should see him in us. and be drawn toward the gospel, because the gospel is not just words. The gospel is a transformed life. So how do we work that out in our relationship? So I think in marriage, we look and we say, am I acting, for instance, as a man, am I acting toward my wife in a spirit of truth and grace both? So truth, am I holding up standards? Am I leading my family? Am I saying there are certain things we won't watch on television? There are times we will spend together in God's Word. We will protect the children from the internet. They shouldn't have a computer privately in their room, because as a man, I know what I would have done if I was a junior high kid and I could access all of these pictures that are inappropriate, and I could access tens of thousands of them, which you can on the internet. What would I have done? All right, look at that. I know what I would have done, so I protect my children from doing that. But so this is a standard of truth. So that's a very practical way. It's a moral guardrail. Then what about grace? Well, do I have a standard of grace in my family that doesn't get angry, first of all, at things that aren't sin anyway? A child knocks over a glass of milk at the dinner table. Is that sin? Yeah, I'm sure it can be. I'm sure a child can look at it and go, I'm going to knock that thing over. And then you'll discern, you'll know whether it's sin or not. But it's just a kid. They're just reaching for something. They knock the milk over. Don't turn it into like you have been offended as a parent. Like it's a moral outrage. Save your battles. And then extend grace and put your armor on your child. When they make a mistake, yes, even when they sin, extend forgiveness. Pray with them. And then say, you know what? I've done many wrong things too. And the other thing is, in my family, one of the things I did a lot with the girls is to come to them and just say, girls, please forgive me, because I was angry when I said that, and I raised my voice, and that was wrong, and I shouldn't have, and I want you to know how much I love you. And it's funny, to this day, my daughters will tell me that some of the things that helped them the most was when I admitted my own sins, my own errors, and asked their forgiveness, so that we had a climate of grace in the home.
That's right. Even in Ephesians 5, it says that our responsibility with our wives is to love them.
Yes.
As Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. Which means my responsibility for Lori is to be like Christ for her.
Exactly.
Fullness of grace and truth.
And that means that we're not always trying to change them, that we understand that God is at work. And my wife Nancy, who's my closest friend, she's terrific. And the relationship that Nancy and I enjoy together is not based on we are going to meet each other's deepest needs, because only Christ can do that. And it's not based upon her or me becoming someone other than who we are. It's extending grace and realizing we have the distinct natures that God has given us, and He has brought certain things to the table. And once you set up your marriage partner as somebody who's supposed to meet all your needs, you are setting up your marriage for disaster, because they will never live up to those expectations. They cannot, because they are not God.